Hi, welcome to Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia. It's April 29th, 2019, and today's guest is Cathy Smalley Pales from Take a Breath Coaching. Join us as we discuss gender and leadership. Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia is brought to you by Rogue Tulips LLC, 501c consulting services, association management support, and provider of distinctive projects. We are also a proud supporter of the 501c League, a virtual membership organization. Hi, welcome to Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia. I am Cecilia Seth. I am the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips LLC, a 501c consulting firm, and I'm here with my co-host Agnes.
Good morning, Cecilia. I'm AgnesAmos-Coleman. I'm an author and a consultant.
Thank you, Agnes. And Agnes is also part of the Rogue Tulips Network as a consultant. And we're here today with our first guest, Cathy Pales, EDD, who is a coach for women in leadership. So Cathy, could you introduce yourself?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. I am Cathy Smalley Pales. I am the owner of Take a Breath Coaching, which is a leadership coaching practice specifically for women association executives to help them lead at their best with courageous authenticity.
Great. And Cathy, what is your website?
My website is takeabreathcoaching.com.
Great. Easy to remember and
Yes.
also to spell. So Cathy did us a great favor and sent us a few talking points so we can get our conversation going today. So I'm going to go with the first question. So Cathy, you focus specifically on women in leadership. So in your viewpoint, what is the effect of gender on leadership roles?
That's a huge question we're going to try to answer in a very short period of time. Well, what is interesting about gender and leadership is how our thinking about leadership has evolved over time. One of the classic theories of leadership is the great man theory, which it sort of explains in the name of the theory, right? That leadership was defined by sort of the image of a great man. Think about Winston Churchill, or think about Gandhi, or think about Martin Luther King. And views of leadership sort of were based upon those types of images. What we've come to learn about leadership is that it's not specifically gender specific, that there are a set of effective practices of leadership that are gender neutral, that can be practiced by men or women equally well, and it's not dependent on whether you're a man or a woman. My particular favorite model that I use most often in my practice with my clients is the model from Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner in their wonderful book, The Leadership Challenge, which I believe is on its 6th or 7th edition now. The model's been around for 30 maybe almost 40 years by now. And they talk about the 5 exemplary practices of leadership. And none of those practices of leadership, it's not dependent upon whether you're a man or a woman. How you practice those, you express yourself through those practices is an individual choice, and individual leaders will practice the 5 exemplary practices differently, but it's not specific to, well, men will do it one way and women will do it another. Individuals will do it differently based on a whole set of characteristics, gender being one of those characteristics, but it's also your personality, it's your skills, it's your traits, it's your experiences, it's your knowledge. It's everything that makes us each unique individual human beings.
Great.
And that's what we bring to the table.
Great. Okay, so it's not necessarily a gender issue, but I think, Agnes, did you have a follow-up question?
I think it's fascinating because you're right, Cathy. You know, when you look at leadership, you know, the world, in many unspoken ways, there's more that leaning towards a man leadership.
Yeah.
And that kind of leaves the woman gender out of the equation, and we begin to wonder, where do we find ourselves here as women leaders? And we have great women leaders out there who do tremendous work and really are, you know, forerunners for us, who, you know, and I think that, you know, it truly is very refreshing to find that this kind of model is out there, and some of the work that you're doing that would empower, you know, all of us, regardless of whether we are male or female in the leadership spectrum. So it's for me, I think it's really interesting and fascinating, you know?
And
yeah, well, what we're finding is, and certainly being a woman has some unique challenges in the leadership space. And that's true in the United States and Canada, sort of our North American, I'll talk about the North American experience, because I think that's what most of us are used to, raised in, is the challenges being of racism, of sexism, of our standard by which we're all judged for the most part is white, male, Christian, heterosexual for the most part. And the further you are away from that model, the harder it is for you to overcome racism, sexism, sort of stereotypical views of how you're supposed to behave or how you're supposed to act. And I think women in particular are under a lot of pressure to, in the leadership space, to behave a certain way based on that model of white, male, Christian, heterosexual. And my work is helping my clients realize that they're at their strongest when they're acting as their best self.
Right.
And it's helping them figure out what their best self is. And I use the term courageous authenticity because it takes courage to show up as yourself, as your best self, and say, here I am. And then helping my clients look at those 5 exemplary practices of leadership and helping them figure out, given their uniqueness, their authenticity, their authentic self, how best can they then practice those exemplary practices? What's right for them? So I'm not saying that if you're naturally a rude person, be rude. Because that's not part of being exemplary. That's not part of being a good leader, is being rude, right?
Right. That's not part of being a good person.
It's not exactly right. So it's being who you are at your best,
right?
And being less concerned about sort of comparing yourself to that white male Christian heterosexual model for which we're all judged, and being aware of that, that we're all judged by that. And then deciding for yourself, well, okay, I'm being judged by that, but I'm gonna be who I am and bring my special gifts to the table that I can bring. A quick example of this is Tina Brown wrote, I believe it was in the New York Times, and I hope I'm correct on that, a few weeks ago, and she wrote an essay about the Prime Minister of New Zealand, of how she responded to the crisis in New Zealand over the shooting at the mosque. And Tina made the point that by being a woman, she brought a special set of life experiences to the table in the way she dealt with that crisis. And that she dealt with it in a very, if you want to call it, feminine way, but she was the right leader at the right time. And she came to that crisis, dealt with that crisis in a way that was authentic for her, and it was extraordinarily powerful. And she got kudos across the board of how she responded. And one of the examples that there's a very well known picture of her, just the look on her face. It looked like she aged 10 years. Just the look of grief on her face as she was hugging someone at the memorial service for the victims of the shooting. And you do wonder if a man would have allowed himself to be photographed that way, right? But we look at her and say, it was that a sign of weakness. And I think a lot of women would be concerned about letting people see them emotional, but she wasn't, because she was authentically, emotionally, deeply touched and affected by what happened. And she let her country know that. And it was a source of power and strength for her, rather than something that people criticized her for. And I want to see more women do that. I want to see more women not be afraid to show emotion, and not be afraid to show themselves in ways because they're concerned about what other people will think, or people won't think they're strong because they're judging themselves on that white male Christian heterosexual model.
Okay, because we're
running out of time because I talk too much.
I am going to be a courageous, authentic woman leader and say we need to move on to another question.
Thank you.
No, but those are great examples, and you remind me of an old saying, men are what they do and women are what they look like. And I think that's a lot of what women have to overcome, the perception wise. But I think sometimes, and this is my opinion, love it or not, I think sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot. Because we go along with those perceptions, because we buy into the myths, we buy into that worldview that women cannot be leaders, or women cannot be leaders as good as men. But I do want to make a pitch, and Cathy, if you haven't read this book, you would probably love it. It's called Warrior Women. A woman archaeologist who did all her research back in the 90s, and she found women leaders in steppe tribes in Asia are selected because they are the best person for the job. Not because they are a woman or a man. Because they're the one who's the best leader, who will keep everybody alive. Now, you've mentioned several times courageous authenticity, and I do want to have a quick question for you about that. But we do have a slide for you, and we want to thank you for sharing this with us. So let us share our screen here so everybody can see what we're talking about here. And here is your image of courageous authenticity. So could you walk us through this a little bit?
Sure. I thank you, and I'll be more brief, succinct. You can tell I'm passionate about this topic, so I can go on for a while. So how I define courageous, and because we don't have time, I won't go into how I came up with that name. I have to give credit to a women's conference I attended a few years ago with the Women's Center in Northern Virginia. And they do a lovely women's conference every year, and they highlight influential women leaders. And they have them talk about their leadership journey. And the theme of all of their talks, I don't think they planned it, I think it just happened this way, is the moment that they felt like they came into their own. And they all described this model in one way or the other. And the term authenticity or authentic leadership, that's been around for a while. That's not an unusual term. But I wanted to add the courageous, because one of the speakers that I listened to really talked about how much courage it took her to finally decide to show up as she is, and to not be as concerned what other people thought. And I have certainly witnessed women who I most admire have a great deal of courage. And I'm also influenced by the work of Brene Brown, who talks about finding courage, the courage to be vulnerable and the courage to be authentic. So that's how I came up with the term. So it's three things. It's embracing your unique purpose, power, and presence. And it's coupling that with knowing and using the best practices of authentic leadership, effective leadership, which I mentioned, the Kouzes and Posner model. And it's also being that person in all four domains of your life: the self, your personal life, your work life, your home life, and in your community life. So it's not being a different person at home than you are at work, because I think there's a challenge, there's a tendency that we show up very differently in the different domains. Well, that's stressful, and that's not authentic, and that doesn't put you at your best. Your best is when you are your authentic self, your courageously authentic self, in all four domains of your life. And that helps you with work-life integration and all that good stuff, which is a whole nother topic I won't get into.
Right, because we only have 2 minutes.
I know, exactly. It's a whole other, that's much
we'll have you back to talk about that.
Yeah, so there's the model. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments.
Well, that's great. So let's, well, I'm going to go ahead, and so we can all see each other again. There we go. No, that's a great model. Cathy has a lot of information on her website, but what advice do you have for women leaders who are out there being their authentic selves? And yeah, it does take courage, because you're going to get a lot of pushback, and people aren't always receptive to it. So what advice do you have for women who are being their courageous, authentic leadership self, and yet are running into opposition?
Right. Well, it's being mindful and noticing the type of opposition you're receiving. So if you feel like you're being your authentic self and you're being your best self and you're receiving pushback, is to take a moment to say, okay, is there a pattern here? Is there something that I need to learn from this? Is there something that, is not hitting people in the best way. So what I always do with my clients is the first step of change is self-observation. So let's say I had a client who was expressing a concern about how she was showing up at meetings, for instance, just to pull something out of a hat, and saying, and she was talking about maybe she didn't feel like she was being effective in meetings. So what I would have her do, and this is true for anybody, is to really pay attention. So choose a couple of weeks. It doesn't have to be every day of the week, but maybe 3 or 4 days a week for the next 2 or 3 weeks. And whenever you're in a meeting, really notice what the dynamics of that meeting. Who's at the table? What's the topic? What are the desired outcomes of the meeting? How did you feel going into the meeting? What was your role in the meeting? And sort of, it's the fancy term is to be the observer I am. And it's a way, and practicing mindfulness techniques, meditation, other things, helps you do this better. It's basically observing, being able to observe your own behavior. It's being able to separate your emotions and your thoughts and observe yourself like you were an anthropologist observing people across the room from you. So it's trying to have an objective, unemotional view of yourself and see what you learned. Be curious. It's not looking for what you did right or what you did wrong. It's just watching for what is, and then asking yourself, okay, what patterns did I see? What can I learn from this? And then it gives you a clue. That gives you a clue of, is there something I need to change? Is there a behavior I need to change? Or no, is it organizational culture that I can have an impact on? Or is it someone particular in the room that I'm having a reaction to that's causing me to have a reaction? So it's being curious, and seeing what's there.
Wow, and these are great questions, and they are definitely piquing our curiosity, but we are unfortunately out of time. So we want to thank you for being here today, and we will definitely have you back because you have a lot of great things. Agnes, any closing thoughts?
No, I think, Cathy, you shared some really great insights for us today, and thank you for joining Cecilia and I.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation, and maybe we should have done this as a series. We'll talk about that because there's so many issues for women in leadership. And thank you all for watching and for joining us today. And, take 15 minutes and have a conversation with someone. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.